It was January 29th, 2026, at 2:47 a.m. when a dream so vivid and disturbing it felt like a warning drove me to a rocky outcrop in the mountain wilderness 3 miles from my home. And there, surrounded by jagged stone formations that jutted toward heaven like ancient fingers reaching for God, beneath a sky so thick with stars it looked like diamonds scattered across black velvet, Jesus appeared before me with tears streaming down his face and said that the 1111 you've been seeing everywhere, on clocks, on receipts, on license plates, and timestamps, isn't coincidence or angel numbers or numerology, but heaven's emergency broadcast system marking specific souls for what's coming in February 2026. Not everyone who sees this message is meant to see it. Some will scroll past, some will ignore it. But you've been marked. And if you're hearing these words right now, if something in your spirit is stirring, then you need to understand that what I'm about to share with you isn't entertainment. It's a warning that could change the trajectory of your eternal destiny. Before I go any further, I need you to do something. Drop your prayer requests in the comments right now. I don't care how impossible your situation seems. I don't care if you've prayed 1,000 times before. There is power when believers agree together, and I'm going to be praying over every single request. And if you're someone who believes that God still speaks, that he still moves, that he still reveals mysteries to those who seek him, then subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell, because what I'm about to share over these next few nights isn't for casual observers. It's for true believers who are hungry for truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes them. Many of you know me as the actor who portrays Jesus in The Chosen. That role has been the greatest honor of my life, but it's also opened doors in the spiritual realm that I never anticipated. When you spend years studying the words of Christ, meditating on his character, trying to embody even a fraction of his love and truth, something happens in your spirit. You become sensitized, attuned. And what happened to me 3 nights ago wasn't acting. It wasn't imagination. It was the most real encounter I've ever experienced. Let me take you back to that moment. I couldn't sleep. For 3 weeks leading up to January 29th, I'd been waking up at exactly 2:22 a.m., then 3:33 a.m., then 11:11 p.m., every single night, like clockwork. And each time I'd wake up, I'd feel this overwhelming urge to pray, but I didn't know what I was praying for. I'd just feel this heaviness, this burden that something massive was coming, something that would separate those who truly know him from those who just know about him. That night, technically early morning, I woke up at 2:47 a.m. and I heard it. Not audibly, but clearer than any audible voice I've ever heard. Come outside. Come to the high place. I need to show you something. I'm not someone who hears from God casually. I'm not someone who throws around "God told me" lightly, but this was unmistakable. So I got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, and drove to this place I'd discovered months ago during a hike, a rocky outcrop about 40 minutes outside the city where the mountain wilderness opens up into this breathtaking view of valleys and distant peaks. The temperature was brutal, maybe 38 degrees, with a wind that cut through my jacket like it wasn't even there. My breath came out in clouds. The beam of my flashlight bounced off the rocks as I climbed, my boots crunching on loose gravel and patches of frost. When I reached the outcrop, I turned off the flashlight. The darkness was absolute for about 10 seconds, until my eyes adjusted. And then I saw it. The stars. Thousands of them. Millions of them. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. I could hear the wind moving through the pine trees below, that rushing sound like distant water. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. The air smelled like cold stone and pine needles and something else, something clean and ancient. I stood there on that rocky platform, maybe 20 feet across, with a sheer drop on one side and the mountain rising behind me, and I did what I came to do. I prayed. Lord, why did you bring me here? What do you want to show me? And then the temperature changed. I don't mean it got warmer or colder. I mean the quality of the air itself shifted. It became thick, almost liquid. The stars seemed to brighten, and the wind stopped completely, just ceased, like someone had pressed pause on creation itself. That's when I saw him. He was standing about 10 feet away, at the edge of the outcrop, looking out over the valley. He wasn't glowing like in paintings. He looked solid, real, more real than the rocks beneath my feet. He was wearing simple clothes, and his hair moved slightly even though the wind had stopped. And when he turned to look at me, his eyes, I can't describe his eyes. They held everything, all the love in the universe and all the sorrow too. Jonathan, he said, and his voice resonated not just in my ears, but in my chest, in my bones. Do you know why I brought you here? I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't form words. I just shook my head. He turned back to look at the valley, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with emotion. Because what I'm about to show you needs to be seen from a high place. Because my people are in the valley, and they don't see what's coming. They don't understand what the signs mean. The signs? I managed to whisper. The 1111, he said, and when he spoke those numbers, they seemed to echo across the mountains. You've been seeing it, haven't you? For months now, maybe longer. I nodded. I had been. On my phone, on clocks, on random receipts. I'd mentioned it to friends, and they'd all said the same thing. They were seeing it too. We'd laughed about it, called it weird, moved on. It's not weird, Jesus said, as if he'd heard my thoughts. It's a marking. It's heaven's way of getting the attention of specific souls before February 2026. What happens in February? I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. He turned to face me fully, and I saw tears on his cheeks. Actual tears catching the starlight. A separation, he said, a revealing. A moment when the fence-sitters will have to choose, when the lukewarm will be exposed, when those who have been playing church will be confronted with the reality of their spiritual condition. He raised his hand, and suddenly the valley below us changed. I don't know how to explain this except to say that I was still standing on that rocky outcrop, still feeling the cold stone beneath my feet, still smelling the pine and frost, but I was also seeing something else overlaid on reality. I saw people, millions of them. They were going about their lives, working, shopping, scrolling through phones, sitting in church pews, raising hands in worship. And above each person's head I saw numbers. Some had 1111 glowing above them in golden light. Others had nothing. The ones with the marking, Jesus said softly, are the ones I'm calling to wake up. They're the ones who still have ears to hear, eyes to see. They're the ones who've been feeling restless in their spirits, who've been sensing that something is off in the church, in their lives, in the world. The 1111 is my way of saying, I see you, I'm calling you, pay attention. But why 1111? I asked. What does it mean? He smiled, but it was a sad smile. 11 is the number of disorder, of chaos, of things not being complete. 12 is the number of divine government, of completion. 12 tribes, 12 apostles, 12 gates. But 11 is one short. It's the number that says, something is missing, something is wrong. You're not where you're supposed to be. He gestured to the vision again, and I saw one of the people with 1111 above their head. It was a woman, maybe in her 40s, sitting in a church service. She was singing, hands raised, tears on her face. She looked like the picture of devotion. Watch, Jesus said. The service ended. The woman got in her car, and the moment she left the parking lot, her face changed. The worship expression vanished. She turned on music that would make a sailor blush. She called someone on her phone and spent 20 minutes gossiping viciously about people in her small group. She stopped at a store and screamed at a cashier over a coupon. She went home and ignored her husband's attempts at conversation, scrolling through social media for 3 hours while he sat alone in the next room. She sees 1111 every single day, Jesus said, multiple times a day, and every time she sees it, her spirit registers it, even if her conscious mind dismisses it. I'm trying to wake her up. I'm trying to show her that her worship and her life don't match, that she's one short of completion, that she's living in disorder while claiming my name. The vision shifted. I saw a man, young, maybe late 20s. He had 1111 above his head too. He was a worship leader, talented, passionate. I watched him lead a service where people encountered God, where the presence was thick and real. Then I watched him go home and spend hours watching pornography. I watched him manipulate women with spiritual language. I watched him build a platform, while his private life was a disaster of addiction and deception. He sees 1111 constantly, Jesus said, and now his voice was breaking. On his phone when he's in the middle of sin, on the clock when he's lying to his accountability partner, on receipts when he's spending money on things that feed his addiction. I'm screaming at him through the numbers. Wake up. You're not complete. You're in disorder. February is coming, and you're not ready. I felt sick. Lord, what happens in February? What's coming? He looked at me with such intensity that I almost stepped backward. A revealing. Not the end, not yet, but a moment when masks come off, when hidden things come to light, when people who've been coasting on yesterday's encounter will find themselves spiritually bankrupt, when those who've been seeing 1111 and ignoring it will face a crisis that forces them to choose. truly surrender everything, or walk away from the faith they've been pretending to have. The wind suddenly returned, stronger than before, whipping around the outcrop with a sound like a roar. The vision faded, and I was back to just seeing the normal valley, the normal stars, the normal night. But Jesus was still there, standing at the edge of the rocks, his silhouette framed against the star-filled sky. "Jonathan," he said, "I need you to tell them. Everyone who's been seeing 1111, it's not random, it's not angels, it's not the universe, it's me, trying to get their attention before February, trying to wake them up, trying to show them that they're living in disorder, that they're one short of where they need to be, that time is running out to get their house in order." "But Lord," I said, my voice shaking, "what do I tell them to do? How do they respond?" He turned to face me one more time. "Come back tomorrow night. Same time, same place. I'll show you more. I'll show you what's at stake. I'll show you what happens to those who see the marking and ignore it." And then he was gone. Not gradually, not fading. Just gone, like he'd never been there. Except the air still felt thick. The stars still seemed brighter than normal. And when I looked down at my phone to check the time, it read 3:33 a.m. I stood there on that rocky outcrop for another 20 minutes, shaking from cold, from fear, from awe, I don't know. The wind continued to rush through the trees below. The owl called again. Slowly the night returned to normal, but I knew I would never be normal again. I'm recording this just hours after it happened. My hands are still shaking. Part of me wonders if I'm losing my mind. But the bigger part of me, the part that knows his voice, knows this was real as the ground beneath my feet, as real as the breath in my lungs. If you've been seeing 1111, this message is for you. Not everyone will understand, not everyone is meant to, but you know, something in your spirit is confirming this right now. You've been feeling it, haven't you? That restlessness, that sense that something is off, that conviction that you're not where you're supposed to be spiritually. Heaven has marked you. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Tomorrow night, I'm going back to that outcrop. Jesus said he has more to show me, more to reveal about what's coming in February and what it means for those who've been seeing the signs. I'll share what happens, but I need you to do something right now. Don't scroll past this. Don't dismiss it. Drop a comment, even just 1111 if you've been seeing it. Let's see how many of us have been marked. Let's see how big this is, and pray. Pray for discernment. Pray for courage. Pray for whatever Jesus is trying to wake up in your spirit. Because if what he showed me tonight is true, and I believe with everything in me that it is, then February 2026 is going to change everything for those who've been marked. The question is, will you be ready? I barely slept after that first encounter. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers, 1111, glowing above people's heads like heaven's emergency flares. I saw the woman in church, worshiping with her hands raised while her life screamed the opposite. I saw the worship leader, anointed on stage, enslaved in private. And I heard his voice, breaking with emotion, "I'm trying to wake them up." January 30th, 2026, crawled by like a wounded animal. I went through the motions of my day, meetings, emails, conversations, but I was somewhere else entirely. My mind kept returning to that rocky outcrop, to the way the air had changed, to the weight of his presence. Several times I checked my phone, and each time, I'm not exaggerating, it showed 1111, morning and night. It was like he was confirming, this is real. And tonight there's more. At 2:30 a.m. on January 31st, I was already awake. I didn't need an alarm. My body knew. My spirit knew. I dressed in layers this time, thermal underwear, flannel, a heavy jacket, because I knew I'd be out there for a while. The temperature had dropped even further. The weather report said 32 degrees, but in the mountains it would feel colder. The drive to the trailhead was surreal. The roads were empty, the world asleep. My headlights cut through darkness so complete it felt solid. I passed a digital bank sign that read the time, 2:47 a.m., the same time he'd called me out the night before. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. When I reached the trailhead and began the climb, everything felt different from the first night. The darkness seemed deeper, more alive. My flashlight beam seemed weaker somehow, swallowed by shadows that pressed in from all sides. The wind had picked up significantly. I could hear it roaring through the canyon below, a sound like distant thunder that never stopped. The hike took longer this time, maybe because I was tired or maybe because I was afraid. Not afraid of Jesus, never of him, but afraid of what he might show me. afraid of the responsibility of carrying this message, afraid that people would think I'd lost my mind. When I finally reached the rocky outcrop, I was breathing hard, my legs burning from the climb. I stood at the center of that stone platform, surrounded by the jagged formations that rose like ancient sentinels, and I looked up at the sky. The stars were even more brilliant than the night before. But there was something else, the faintest hint of green on the northern horizon. Aurora borealis, this far south. Rare, but not impossible. The green light shimmered and danced, and I knew, it wasn't coincidence. I turned off my flashlight and let my eyes adjust. The wind whipped around me, pulling at my jacket, stinging my face with cold. I could smell the pine trees, sharp and clean, mixed with the mineral scent of the rocks and something else. Ozone, maybe, like before a lightning strike. "I'm here, Lord," I said into the wind. "I came back. Show me what you need me to see." For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the wind, the distant sound of trees creaking, the faint whisper of the aurora above. I stood there shivering, wondering if I'd misunderstood, if last night had been a one-time thing. Then the wind stopped, completely, utterly, like someone had thrown a switch. The silence was so profound it hurt my ears. Even the trees below went quiet. The only sound was my own breathing, loud and ragged in the stillness. And he was there. This time he was sitting on one of the larger rocks, his posture heavy, his shoulders bowed like he was carrying an impossible weight. He didn't look at me immediately. He just sat there, staring out at the valley, and I could see his chest rising and falling like he was trying to control his breathing. "Lord," I whispered. He turned his head slowly, and what I saw in his face made my knees weak. Pain. Deep, ancient pain. The kind of pain that comes from watching people you love destroy themselves while calling your name. "Sit with me, Jonathan," he said quietly. I moved to a rock near him and sat down. The stone was freezing through my jeans, but I barely noticed. I was too focused on his face, on the way the aurora's green light played across his features. "Do you know what breaks my heart most?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not the atheists, it's not the mockers, it's not even the ones who openly reject me. It's the ones who use my name while living for themselves, the ones who sing my songs on Sunday and serve themselves the other 6 days, the ones who've been marked with 1111, who've been feeling my spirit tug at them for months, maybe years, and they keep hitting snooze on my alarm." He stood up suddenly, and the intensity of his movement made me flinch. He walked to the edge of the outcrop, and when he raised his hand, the vision began again. But this time it was different, more intense, more detailed, more devastating. The valley below transformed into a massive landscape of souls, and I could see them all at once, millions of people, their lives playing out like simultaneous movies. And above so many of them, the numbers glowed. 1111. "Watch this one," Jesus said, pointing. I saw a pastor, mid-50s, successful megachurch, thousands in attendance. The 1111 blazed above his head like a neon sign. I watched him preach with power and passion, watched people come to the altar weeping, watched genuine moves of the Spirit in his services. Then I watched him in his office, screaming at his staff with a cruelty that made me wince. I watched him manipulate board members to increase his salary, while missionaries he supported went without. I watched him craft his sermons not based on what the Spirit was saying, but on what would trend on social media. I watched him ignore his wife's loneliness, his children's pain, his own soul's emptiness, all while building a brand. "He sees 1111 every single day," Jesus said, and his voice was thick with grief. "On his computer when he's editing sermons to make himself look better, on the clock when he's choosing platform over prayer, on his phone when he's checking his follower count instead of checking on his family. I'm begging him to wake up, to see that his ministry and his life are in disorder, that he's one short of integrity, of authenticity, of genuine surrender." The scene shifted. A young woman, college age, on fire for God at youth conferences. The 1111 marked her clearly. I watched her lead worship, prophesy with accuracy, pray with a passion that moved others to tears. Then I watched her at school, hiding her faith like it was something shameful. I watched her get drunk at parties, sleep with her boyfriend, participate in tearing down other Christians online. I watched her maintain 2 completely separate lives, conference Christian and campus chameleon. She sees it constantly, Jesus said. 11:11 on her phone between worship sets and hookups. On the microwave when she's hungover on Sunday morning. On receipts when she's buying things to fill the void she won't let me fill. I'm trying to show her. You're living in disorder. You're incomplete. You can't serve two masters, and February is coming when you'll have to choose. He turned to me, and the aurora behind him flared brighter, casting his face in an otherworldly green glow. Do you understand what I'm showing you? The 11:11 isn't a blessing, it's a warning, it's a mercy. It's me saying, I see the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are. I see the disorder, I see the incompleteness, and I'm giving you time, until February, to get it right. But Lord, I said, my voice shaking, what specifically happens in February? What's the deadline? He sat back down on the rock, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. A revealing, a moment when hidden things come to light, not supernaturally, though my hand will be in it, but through circumstances, through consequences, through the natural outworking of seeds that have been sown in secret. He gestured, and the vision shifted again. I saw the pastor's financial improprieties being discovered. I saw the young woman's double life colliding in a crisis that forced her to choose. I saw the worship leader's addictions being exposed. I saw the churchwoman's gossip and cruelty finally catching up to her relationships. But it wasn't just individuals. I saw entire churches splitting. I saw ministries collapsing. I saw Christian leaders being exposed. I saw people walking away from faith entirely, not because they lost belief in God, but because they lost belief in the people who claimed to represent Him. February 2026 is when the chickens come home to roost, Jesus said, and there was no satisfaction in his voice, only sorrow. When the gap between Sunday morning and Monday through Saturday becomes too wide to hide, when the disorder becomes undeniable, when those who've been living at 11 instead of 12 find themselves in crisis, the wind suddenly returned, stronger than before, howling around the outcrop with a ferocity that made me grab onto the rock to steady myself. The aurora above began to pulse and swirl, green light dancing across the sky like it was alive. But here's what you need to understand, Jesus continued, raising his voice above the wind. The 11:11 isn't condemnation, it's invitation. Every time someone sees it, I'm saying, come up higher, get complete, move from disorder to divine order. Let me close the gap between your public faith and your private life. Let me make you whole. He stood and walked toward me, and I felt the full weight of his presence. The air became thick again, charged with something I can only describe as holy electricity. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and warmth flooded through me despite the freezing temperature. Jonathan, I need you to understand something, he said, looking directly into my eyes. You're not exempt from this. You've been seeing 11:11 too. You've been marked too. Not because you're special, but because you're also incomplete. You also have gaps. You also have areas where your life doesn't match your calling. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. God, he was right. I thought about the times I'd been impatient with people, the times I'd been more concerned with my image than with truth, the times I'd coasted on yesterday's encounter instead of pressing in for today's intimacy, the times I'd played the role of Jesus on screen while struggling to follow him off screen. Tears started streaming down my face, freezing on my cheeks in the cold air. Lord, I don't want to be incomplete. I don't want to live in disorder. What do I do? What do we do? He squeezed my shoulder, and his touch was both comforting and convicting. You get honest, brutally honest. You stop performing and start surrendering. You stop managing your image and start letting me transform your reality. You take the areas where you're at 11 and you invite me into them, not to fix them for you, but to complete them with you. The vision appeared one more time, but this time it was different. I saw the same people, the pastor, the young woman, the worship leader, the churchwoman, but in this version they were responding to the 11:11. They were getting honest, they were confessing, they were making changes, they were allowing the disorder to be confronted and corrected. And above their heads, the 11:11 slowly transformed into 12:12. That's completion, Jesus said softly. That's divine order. That's what I'm calling everyone who's been marked to move toward. Not perfection, completion, not performance, authenticity, not image management, genuine transformation. I watched as these transformed people entered February 2026, and while chaos swirled around them, while others were being exposed and falling apart, they stood firm. Not because they were better, but because they'd responded to the warning, they'd closed the gaps, they'd moved from 11 to 12. The ones who respond to the 11:11, Jesus said, will enter February as a refining fire that purifies. The ones who ignore it will enter February as a consuming fire that exposes. Same fire, different response, different outcome. He removed his hand from my shoulder and walked back to the edge of the outcrop. The aurora was beginning to fade, the first hint of pre-dawn light touching the eastern horizon. The wind had calmed to a steady breeze, and I could hear the first birds beginning to call from the forest below. "Tomorrow night," he said without turning around, "I'll show you the final piece. I'll show you exactly what those who've been marked need to do. I'll show you the practical steps, the specific actions, the daily choices that move someone from 11 to 12. But Jonathan," he turned to face me, and his expression was fierce with love and urgency. "Time is short. February is 3 weeks away. 3 weeks for people to get honest, to get complete, to get ready." "Will 3 weeks be enough?" I asked. He smiled, and it was the saddest, most hopeful smile I'd ever seen. "For those who truly want to change, 3 weeks is more than enough. I can do more in 3 weeks of genuine surrender than in 3 years of religious performance. But they have to want it. They have to respond. They have to stop hitting snooze on my alarm." The light was growing stronger now, the stars beginning to fade. Jesus began to fade too, becoming translucent, like morning mist, burning off in sunlight. "Same time tomorrow," he said, his voice growing distant. "Be here. I'll show you the rest." And then he was gone, and I was alone on that rocky outcrop as dawn broke over the mountains. The sky turned from black to deep blue to purple to pink, and I sat there watching the sunrise, my mind reeling, my heart pounding, my spirit both terrified and exhilarated. I stayed until full daylight, until the sun was warm on my face and the frost had melted from the rocks. I needed time to process, to pray, to let the weight of what I'd seen settle into my bones. As I finally stood to leave, I checked my phone. Dozens of messages, hundreds of comments on last night's video, and the time, 11:11 a.m. I laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears. "I hear you, Lord," I said to the empty air. "I hear you." The hike down was easier in daylight, but my legs were shaking from exhaustion and emotion. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before starting the engine. I'm recording this now, just hours after the second encounter. My voice is hoarse from the cold air and from crying. My body is exhausted, but my spirit is alive in a way it hasn't been in months. If you're watching this, if you've been seeing 11:11, I need you to hear me. This isn't a game. This isn't entertainment. This is heaven's emergency broadcast system trying to get your attention before February 2026 changes everything. Look at your life honestly. Where are you at 11 instead of 12? Where is there disorder instead of divine order? Where does your private life not match your public faith? Where are you incomplete? Don't wait. Don't assume you have more time than you do. February is coming, and it's coming fast. Tomorrow night, tonight actually, since I'm posting this in the afternoon, I'm going back one final time. Jesus said he'll show me the practical steps, the specific actions, the way forward for everyone who's been marked. Drop a comment if you're committed to hearing this through, if you're willing to get honest, if you're ready to move from 11 to 12, no matter what it costs, because it will cost something. Honesty always does. Transformation always does. But the alternative, entering February incomplete, in disorder, still hitting snooze on heaven's alarm, that will cost everything. One more night, one more encounter, one more revelation, and then it's up to you what you do with it. I didn't go home after the second encounter. I couldn't. Something in my spirit told me that if I returned to normal life, to comfort, to routine, to distraction, I'd lose the edge of what God was doing. So I stayed in the mountains. I found a small clearing about half a mile from the rocky outcrop, built a fire as the sun climbed higher, and spent January 31st in prayer and fasting. The day passed in a blur of intercession and wrestling with God. I prayed for everyone who'd been seeing 11:11. I prayed for myself, for the gaps in my own life that he'd exposed. I prayed for courage to deliver the final message, whatever it would be. And I felt him there, in the silence between prayers, in the crackling of the fire, in the wind moving through the pines. As afternoon faded to evening, the temperature dropped again. The sky was clear, impossibly clear, and I knew tonight would be the coldest yet. The weather app on my phone, which I checked one last time before turning it off completely, showed 28 degrees in the valley. Up here it would be colder. I let the fire die as darkness fell. I wanted nothing between me and whatever God was about to reveal. No light but the stars, no warmth but his presence, no comfort but his truth. At 2:47 a.m. on February 1st, 2026, I made my way back to the rocky outcrop for the third time. I knew the path by heart now, could have walked it blindfolded. My flashlight stayed in my pocket. I climbed by starlight, my breath coming in frozen clouds, my fingers numb despite my gloves. When I reached the outcrop, I stopped at the edge and looked up. The sky was a masterpiece, the Milky Way so bright it cast shadows, constellations so clear they looked three-dimensional. And there, on the northern horizon, the aurora had returned. But tonight it wasn't just green. Ribbons of red and purple wove through the green, dancing and pulsing like the heartbeat of heaven itself. I walked to the center of the platform and knelt on the frozen stone. The cold bit through my jeans immediately, but I didn't care. I bowed my head and waited. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 2, 5, 10. The cold became painful, my knees screaming, my body shaking. But I didn't move. I'd come for an encounter, and I wouldn't leave until I had it. Then I felt it, a warmth on the top of my head, like someone had placed their hand there. The warmth spread down my neck, my shoulders, my spine, until my whole body was flooded with heat despite the freezing air. I looked up. He was standing directly in front of me, so close I could have touched him, but this time, he looked different. His face was set like flint, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with an intensity that was almost frightening. This wasn't the grieving Jesus of the previous nights. This was the Jesus who overturned tables in the temple, the Jesus who called out hypocrites, the Jesus who spoke of judgment as well as mercy. "Stand up," he said, and his voice carried an authority that pulled me to my feet without conscious thought. I stood, trembling, not from cold now, but from the sheer power radiating from him. The aurora behind him flared brighter, and suddenly the entire sky seemed to be on fire with colored light. The wind returned, but this time it didn't howl. It roared, like the sound of many waters, like the voice of God himself. "Tonight," Jesus said, his voice cutting through the wind, "I show you what's at stake. Tonight you see what happens to those who ignore the marking. Tonight you understand why February 2026 is the deadline." He raised both hands, and the vision exploded into existence around us. But this wasn't like the previous nights. This time, I wasn't just watching, I was in it. The rocky outcrop was still beneath my feet, but I was also standing in the middle of a vast spiritual landscape that stretched in every direction. I saw a massive divide opening in the ground, a chasm that split the landscape in two. On one side stood millions of people with 1212 glowing above their heads, those who had responded to the 1111, who had gotten honest, who had closed the gaps. On the other side stood millions more, still marked with 1111, still incomplete, still in disorder. "February 2026, Jesus said, and his voice echoed across the chasm, "is when the separation becomes visible, not the final judgment, that comes later, but a revealing, a sorting, a moment when those who are truly mine are distinguished from those who merely use my name." I watched as a storm began to form over the landscape, dark clouds boiling up from nowhere, lightning crackling between them, thunder that shook the ground. The storm moved toward both groups, but what happened next made my blood run cold. For those marked with 1212, those who had responded, who had gotten complete, the storm became a refining fire. I watched as it passed over them, burning away impurities, revealing gold beneath the dross. They emerged stronger, clearer, more radiant. Some wept, some worshipped, but all stood firm. For those still marked with 1111, those who had ignored the warnings, who had kept hitting snooze, the storm became something else entirely, an exposing fire. I watched as their hidden things were dragged into the light. Secret sins became public scandals. Private compromises became visible consequences. The gap between their image and their reality became a chasm that swallowed their credibility, their ministries, their influence. I saw the pastor from the previous vision, the one who had built a megachurch while destroying his soul. The storm hit him in February, and I watched as financial irregularities were discovered, as staff members finally spoke up about his abuse, as his family publicly distanced themselves from him. His church split. His platform collapsed. He stood in the rubble of his reputation, finally forced to confront what he'd been running from for years. But here's what broke me. I saw two different outcomes for him. In one, he fell to his knees in genuine repentance, finally getting honest, finally letting God complete what had been incomplete. In the other, he hardened his heart, blamed everyone else, and walked away from ministry bitter and broken. The storm reveals, Jesus said, but it doesn't determine. Even in February, even in the middle of exposure and consequence, people can still choose. They can still repent. They can still let me complete them. But it's so much harder then, so much more painful, so much more costly. The vision shifted. I saw the young woman, the one living the double life. February came, and her worlds collided. Her Christian friends discovered her party life. Her party friends discovered her Christian life. She was rejected by both, trusted by neither. She sat alone in her dorm room, staring at her phone, seeing 11:11 on the screen, finally understanding what it had been trying to tell her. But again, I saw two paths. In one, she broke completely, got honest with God and others, began the painful work of integration and healing. In the other, she decided both worlds had failed her and walked away from faith entirely, becoming one of the bitter ex-Christians who spend their lives mocking what they once claimed to believe. "Do you see?" Jesus asked, turning to face me fully. The aurora behind him was so bright now it hurt to look at, red and green and purple light painting his face in otherworldly colors. "Do you see why I've been marking people with 11:11? Why I've been trying to wake them up before February? Because I love them too much to let them enter the storm unprepared. Because I'd rather they face their incompleteness now, in mercy, than face it then, in consequence." He walked to the edge of the outcrop, and I followed. The vision was still playing out below us. Millions of stories, millions of choices, millions of outcomes, all hinging on whether people responded to the marking or ignored it. "But Lord," I said, my voice breaking, "what about the ones who never saw 11:11? What about the ones who weren't marked? Are they exempt?" He turned to me, and his expression softened slightly. "The marking isn't about favoritism, Jonathan. It's about mercy. Everyone will face the February storm, everyone. But those I've marked with 11:11 are the ones I'm giving extra warning to. They're the ones living in particular danger because of the gap between their profession and their practice. They're the ones who, if they don't wake up, will do the most damage to themselves, to others, to my name." He gestured to the vision again. "The atheist who enters February as an atheist faces a storm. Yes, but it's a different storm. The genuine believer who enters February complete and whole faces a storm. Yes, but they're prepared for it. But the one who claims my name while living for themselves, the one who's built a reputation on a foundation of sand, the one who's been playing church while serving self, they face a storm that will expose everything, and if they're not prepared, if they haven't closed the gaps, it will destroy them." The wind suddenly intensified, and I had to grab onto a rock to keep from being blown off the outcrop. The aurora exploded across the entire sky, no longer just on the horizon, but directly overhead, a canopy of living light that pulsed and swirled like it was breathing. "This is what I need you to tell them," Jesus said, his voice rising above the wind. "This is the message for everyone who's been seeing 11:11. You have been marked. You have been warned. You have been given time. But time is running out. February is here. The storm is coming, and you need to make a choice, right now, today, this moment, to get honest, to get complete, to close the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are." He raised his hand, and suddenly I saw myself in the vision. I saw my own life, my own gaps, my own areas of incompleteness. I saw the times I'd been more concerned with being perceived as spiritual than actually being spiritual. I saw the times I'd coasted on the anointing of the chosen instead of pursuing fresh intimacy with God. I saw the times I'd been impatient, judgmental, proud, and above my head, clear as day, I saw it. 11:11. Tears streamed down my face, freezing on my cheeks. "Lord, I don't want to be incomplete. I don't want to enter the storm unprepared. What do I do? What do we all do?" He placed both hands on my shoulders, and the warmth that flooded through me was almost unbearable in its intensity. "You get radically honest. You stop hiding. You stop performing. You stop managing your image and start letting me transform your reality." The vision changed one final time. I saw a simple path, marked with light, leading from 11:11 to 12:12, and along the path were specific steps, clear as day. First, I saw people getting alone with God, truly alone, no distractions, no phones, no noise, and asking him one question: where am I incomplete? Where am I in disorder? Where does my life not match my profession? And I watched as he answered, gently but clearly, showing them the gaps they'd been avoiding. Second, I saw them getting honest with at least one other person, a trusted friend, a mentor, a counselor, and confessing the gaps, not for condemnation, but for accountability, not for shame, but for support. I watched as the power of secrecy was broken by the light of confession. Third, I saw them making specific, concrete changes, not vague commitments to do better, but actual decisions with actual consequences. Deleting apps, ending relationships, changing jobs, setting boundaries. Whatever it took to close the gap between 11 and 12. Fourth, I saw them establishing daily rhythms, 30 minutes minimum every single day in God's presence, not performing, not checking a box, but actually connecting, actually listening, actually allowing Him to complete what was incomplete. And as they walked this path, I watched the 11:11 above their heads slowly transform. It didn't happen overnight, it wasn't instant, but day by day, choice by choice, moment of honesty by moment of honesty, the numbers changed. 11:11 became 11:12, then 11:13, then 11:14, until finally it became 12:12. That's the path, Jesus said. That's how you move from disorder to divine order, from incomplete to complete, from marked for warning to marked for protection. It's not complicated, but it is costly. It requires honesty that most people aren't willing to give. It requires change that most people aren't willing to make. It requires daily surrender that most people aren't willing to maintain. He released my shoulders and stepped back. The vision began to fade, the aurora began to dim, and I could feel the encounter coming to an end. But before it did, he spoke one more time, and his words carried a weight that made the air itself feel heavy. Jonathan, tell them this. February 2026 is not the end. It's a beginning. It's the start of a season where the gap between the genuine and the counterfeit becomes undeniable, where those who truly know me are distinguished from those who just know about me, where the wheat and the tares become visible even before the final harvest. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm not doing this to destroy. I'm doing this to refine. I'm not exposing to shame. I'm exposing to heal. I'm not bringing the storm to punish. I'm bringing the storm to purify. But people have to respond. They have to choose. They have to move from 11 to 12 before the storm hits, or they'll spend February being forced to confront what they could have dealt with in mercy. The first light of dawn was touching the eastern horizon. The aurora faded completely. The wind calmed to a whisper, and Jesus began to fade too, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. But his final words hung in the air like they were written in fire. Tell them, warn them, love them enough to tell them the truth. February is here, the storm is coming, and time is up. I collapsed onto the frozen stone, sobbing, from exhaustion, from conviction, from the sheer weight of what I'd witnessed. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I lay there on that rocky outcrop as the world woke up around me. When I finally had the strength to stand, my legs were numb, my body was shaking, and my phone, which I'd turned back on, showed dozens of missed calls and hundreds of messages. The time read 6:47 a.m., but it was the date that made my breath catch, February 1st, 2026. The storm had begun. I'm recording this from my car, parked at the trailhead, still shaking from cold and emotion. I can barely hold the camera steady. My voice is hoarse. My eyes are swollen from crying. But I have to get this message out. I have to tell you what he showed me. If you've been seeing 11:11, this is your final warning. Not from me, from him. February is here. The revealing has begun. The storm is coming, and you need to make a choice right now, today, to get honest and get complete. Don't wait. Don't assume you have more time. Don't think you can keep hitting snooze on heaven's alarm. The consequences are real. The stakes are eternal, and the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are is about to become visible to everyone. But here's the hope. Even now, even in February, even in the middle of the storm, you can still respond. You can still get honest. You can still let him complete what's incomplete. It will be harder. It will be more painful. But it's still possible. Tomorrow, later today actually, I'll share the practical steps, the specific actions, the daily challenge that will move you from 11:11 to 12:12. But right now, I need you to do one thing. Get alone with God. Turn off your phone. Eliminate distractions. And ask him, where am I incomplete? Where am I in disorder? Where does my life not match my profession? And then listen. Really listen. He'll answer. He's been trying to answer through the 11:11. Now he'll answer directly. Drop a comment if you're willing to get honest, if you're ready to face the gaps, if you're committed to moving from 11 to 12 no matter what it costs. Because the storm is here, and the only question that matters now is, are you ready? I'm recording this on February 3rd, 2026, 48 hours after the final encounter on that rocky outcrop. I've spent the last 2 days in prayer, in reflection, and in watching as the storm Jesus warned about begins to manifest in real time. In the past 48 hours, 3 major Christian leaders have been exposed for financial misconduct. 2 prominent worship artists have had their private lives made public in ways that contradict everything they've preached. A viral video is circulating of a well-known pastor screaming at his staff, and his church is in crisis. Social media is exploding with stories of people leaving the faith, of churches splitting, of ministries collapsing. The storm is here, just like he said it would be. But I've also seen something else. I've seen people getting honest. I've seen confessions in my comment section that have made me weep. I've seen people finally admitting the gaps, finally facing the disorder, finally choosing to move from 11 to 12. And I've seen the peace on their faces even as chaos swirls around them. This is what he meant. The same storm, different responses, different outcomes. Yesterday, I drove back to that rocky outcrop one more time. Not at 2:47 a.m., not for another supernatural encounter, but in the middle of the afternoon, in full daylight, because I needed to see the place where everything changed. I needed to stand on that stone platform and remember what he showed me, what he said, what he called me to do. The outcrop looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, more ordinary. The rocks that had seemed like ancient sentinels in the darkness were just rocks. The view that had been mystical under starlight was just a beautiful mountain vista. But standing there, feeling the wind on my face, smelling the pine trees, I could still feel the echo of his presence. I sat on the same rock where he'd sat during the second night, and I prayed, not for another vision, not for more revelation, but for the courage to deliver this final message, for the wisdom to make it practical, for the love to tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. And as I sat there, watching the sun move across the sky, I felt him whisper to my spirit, "Tell them how. Tell them the specific steps. Tell them the daily practice that will move them from incomplete to complete, and tell them they're running out of time." So that's what I'm going to do. If you've been seeing 11:11, if you've felt the conviction of the Holy Spirit through these messages, if you know that there are gaps in your life between your profession and your practice, then what I'm about to share is your roadmap. This is how you move from disorder to divine order. This is how you close the gap. This is how you get ready for the storm that's already here. I'm calling it the 11:11 to 12:12 challenge, and it starts today, not tomorrow, not next week, today, because February is here and we don't have the luxury of procrastination anymore. Step 1, the honesty hour. Every single day, for the next 30 days minimum, you need to spend 1 hour, 60 full minutes, alone with God in complete honesty, not in church, not in a small group, not with worship music playing or a devotional book open, just you and him in raw, unfiltered conversation. Here's how it works. Find a place where you won't be interrupted. Turn off your phone completely, not on silent, off, no distractions, no escape routes, just you and the presence of God. For the first 15 minutes, sit in silence. Don't pray, don't talk, don't do anything. Just be still and let him settle your spirit. This will be harder than you think. Your mind will race. You'll think of 1,000 things you need to do. Push through it. Stillness is where honesty begins. For the next 15 minutes, ask him one question and wait for the answer. Lord, where am I incomplete? Where am I living at 11 instead of 12? Where does my private life not match my public profession? And then listen. Really listen. He'll show you. It might be a relationship you need to end. It might be an addiction you've been hiding. It might be bitterness you've been nursing. It might be pride you've been feeding. It might be compromise you've been justifying. Whatever it is, he'll show you. And when he does, write it down. For the next 15 minutes, confess it out loud. Not in your head. Out loud. There's power in verbal confession. Say it to God like you're talking to a person sitting across from you, because you are. Don't minimize it. Don't justify it. Don't explain it away. Just confess it. Lord, I've been living a double life. Lord, I've been more concerned with my image than with truth. Lord, I've been serving myself while using your name. For the final 15 minutes, ask him what specific action you need to take today to begin closing that gap. Not what you need to do eventually. Not what you'll work on someday. what you need to do today, and then commit to doing it before the day ends. This is non-negotiable. 1 hour, every day, for at least 30 days. I don't care how busy you are. I don't care what else is on your schedule. If you're serious about moving from 11:11 to 12:12, this is where it starts. Step 2. The accountability confession. Within the next 72 hours, that's 3 days from right now, you need to confess your specific gap to at least one other person, not to God only, to another human being who can hold you accountable. This is where most people will quit, because this is where it gets real. This is where your secret becomes known. This is where your image gets shattered. This is where pride dies. But here's what you need to understand. The power of 11:11, the power of disorder, of incompleteness, is secrecy. As long as the gap stays hidden, it stays powerful. The moment you bring it into the light, you break its power. Find someone you trust, a mature believer, a mentor, a counselor, a pastor, a friend who loves you enough to tell you the truth, and tell them everything. Not a sanitized version, not a minimized version. Everything. I've been seeing 11:11 everywhere, and God showed me it's because I'm living in disorder. Here's the gap in my life. Be specific. Here's how long it's been going on. Be honest. Here's what I need to change. Be clear. And I need you to hold me accountable. Then give them permission to ask you hard questions. Give them permission to check in on you. Give them permission to call you out if you start sliding back. This isn't about shame. This is about support. This is about having someone in your corner as you fight the battle to get complete. If you can't think of anyone to confess to, that's a problem in itself. It means you've been living in isolation, which is exactly where the enemy wants you. Find a church, join a small group, connect with a biblical counselor, but don't skip this step. Confession to another person is essential. Step 3. The concrete change. Within the next 7 days, you need to make at least one concrete, irreversible change that closes the gap between your profession and your practice. Not a vague commitment, not a good intention, an actual change with actual consequences. If your gap is pornography, you delete every app that gives you access to it. You install accountability software. You give someone else control of your devices. You cancel subscriptions. You change your routines. Whatever it takes. If your gap is a relationship that's pulling you away from God, you end it, not take a break, not see how it goes. You end it today with clarity and finality. If your gap is financial dishonesty, you come clean. You pay back what you owe. You confess to whoever needs to know. You set up systems of accountability and transparency. If your gap is gossip and slander, you go to every person you've talked about and apologize. You commit to a fast from speaking negatively about anyone for 30 days. You ask people to call you out if they hear you slipping. If your gap is pride and image management, you delete social media for 30 days. You stop performing, you stop curating, you get honest about your struggles instead of only posting your highlights. Whatever your specific gap is, you make a change that costs you something. Because here's the truth. If the change doesn't cost you anything, it's not really a change. It's just a good intention, and good intentions don't close gaps. Jesus said if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. He wasn't being literal, he was being serious. He was saying that closing the gap between who you claim to be and who you actually are requires radical action. It requires being willing to lose something you value in order to gain something you need. What are you willing to lose to get complete? What are you willing to sacrifice to move from 11 to 12? What are you willing to cut off to enter the storm prepared instead of exposed? Step 4. The daily 30. For the next 30 days minimum, and ideally for the rest of your life, you need to spend at least 30 minutes every single day in God's presence, not doing devotions, not reading about Him, not listening to worship music, actually connecting with Him. This is different from the honesty hour in step 1. The honesty hour is about confession and confronting gaps. The daily 30 is about connection and building intimacy. Both are essential. Here's what the daily 30 looks like. 10 minutes of worship, not performance worship, not singing along to a song, but actual worship, telling God who He is, what He means to you, why you love Him, out loud, in your own words, from your heart. 10 minutes in the Word, not speed reading through a chapter, not checking off a Bible in a year plan, but actually reading slowly, asking the Holy Spirit to speak to you, waiting for a verse or phrase to come alive, and when it does, sit with it, meditate on it, let it sink deep. 10 minutes of listening prayer. Sit in silence and ask God, what do you want to say to me today? Then wait, listen, pay attention to what comes to your spirit. Write it down, test it against Scripture, but learn to recognize His voice. 30 minutes, every day, no exceptions, no excuses. This is how you stay complete once you get complete. This is how you maintain divine order once you achieve it. This is how you keep the gap from reopening. I know what some of you are thinking. Jonathan, I don't have 30 minutes a day. I'm too busy. I have work, kids, responsibilities. Let me be blunt. If you don't have 30 minutes a day for the God you claim to serve, then you're proving exactly why you've been seeing 11:11. You're proving that your life is in disorder. You're proving that you're incomplete because we make time for what we value. And if you can't make time for God, then you don't value Him as much as you claim to. The average person spends over 2 hours a day on social media, over 3 hours watching TV or streaming content. If you can find time for that, you can find 30 minutes for God. It's not about having time, it's about making time, it's about priorities, it's about what you're willing to sacrifice to get complete. The deadline. Here's what you need to understand. This isn't open-ended. This isn't whenever you get around to it. There's a deadline, and it's March 5th, 2026. That's 32 days from today. That's how long you have to implement these 4 steps and begin the process of moving from 11:11 to 12:12. Why March 5th? Because that's when the storm intensifies. That's when the revealing moves from individual exposure to corporate shaking. That's when the separation between the genuine and the counterfeit becomes undeniable. I'm not saying the world ends on March 5th. I'm not saying Jesus returns on March 5th. I'm saying that based on what He showed me on that rocky outcrop, March 5th is when the consequences of ignoring the 11:11 warning become unavoidable. It's when those who've been hitting snooze on heaven's alarm will face a crisis that forces them to choose. You have 32 days to get your house in order, 32 days to close the gaps, 32 days to move from disorder to divine order, 32 days to get complete. Will you be perfect by March 5th? No. Perfection isn't the goal. Completion is the goal. Will you have arrived? No. But you'll be on the path. You'll be moving in the right direction. You'll be responding to the marking instead of ignoring it. And when the storm intensifies, when the shaking comes, when the revealing accelerates, you'll stand firm. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because you responded, because you got honest, because you closed the gaps, because you moved from 11 to 12. The choice. I want to be clear about something. Not everyone who's been seeing 11:11 will respond to this message. In fact, most won't. Most will watch these videos, feel convicted for a moment, and then go right back to their lives. Most will hit snooze one more time. Most will convince themselves they have more time than they do. And in March, when the storm intensifies, they'll be caught unprepared. Their hidden things will be exposed. Their gaps will become chasms. Their disorder will become undeniable. And they'll face a choice. Finally get honest and let God complete them through the pain, or harden their hearts and walk away bitter. But some of you, a remnant, a marked group, a chosen few, will respond. You'll get honest, you'll confess, you'll make changes, you'll do the daily work. And when March comes, when the storm intensifies, you'll be ready. Not because you're perfect, but because you're complete. Not because you have it all together, but because you've closed the gaps. This is your moment. This is your choice. This is your opportunity to respond to heaven's emergency broadcast system before it's too late. My testimony. I need to tell you something personal. When Jesus showed me my own 11:11, when He revealed my own gaps, I was devastated. I thought because I play Jesus on screen, because I study His words, because I'm in ministry, that I was somehow exempt. But I'm not. I'm just as incomplete as anyone else. I have just as many gaps. My gap was pride, image management, being more concerned with how people perceive me than with who I actually am before God, coasting on the anointing of the chosen instead of pursuing fresh intimacy, performing spirituality instead of living it. And over the past 3 days, I've been implementing these same 4 steps I'm giving you. I've had my honesty hours, and they've been brutal. I've made my accountability confession, and it was humbling. I've made concrete changes that have cost me, and I've committed to the daily 30 for the rest of my life. I'm not sharing this from a place of arrival. I'm sharing it from a place of journey. I'm not complete yet, but I'm on the path. The 11:11 above my head is changing, slowly, painfully, but it's changing. And if I can do it with all my pride, all my image management, all my gaps, then you can too. The call to action. Here's what I need you to do right now. First, drop a comment. Tell me you're in. Tell me you're committing to the 11:11 to 12:12 challenge. Tell me you're going to implement these 4 steps over the next 32 days. I'm going to be praying over every comment. I'm going to be checking in. I'm going to be walking this journey with you. Second, share this message, not for my benefit, for the benefit of everyone else who's been seeing 11:11 and doesn't understand what it means. There are millions of people marked by heaven who need this warning. Share it on every platform. Send it to everyone you know who's been seeing the numbers. Time is short, and we need to reach as many people as possible before March 5th. Third, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm going to be posting updates throughout this 32-day period. I'm going to be sharing testimonies from people who are implementing the challenge. I'm going to be providing additional teaching and encouragement. You don't want to miss any of it. Fourth, start today, not tomorrow. Today, right now. As soon as this video ends, turn off your phone and have your first honesty hour. Begin the process, start the journey, respond to the marking, the warning, and the hope. I need to end with both a warning and a hope, because that's what Jesus gave me on that rocky outcrop. The warning: if you ignore this message, if you keep hitting snooze on heaven's alarm, if you enter March still living at 11 instead of 12, the storm will expose you. Your hidden things will come to light. Your gaps will become visible. Your disorder will become undeniable, and you'll face consequences that could have been avoided if you just responded in mercy instead of waiting for judgment. The hope, even now, even in February, even with the storm already beginning, it's not too late. God is still calling. Heaven is still marking. The path from 11:11 to 12:12 is still open. You can still get honest. You can still get complete. You can still close the gaps. But you have to choose. You have to respond. You have to act. The same storm, different responses, different outcomes. Which will you choose? I'm going to end this where it all began, on that rocky outcrop in the mountain wilderness. I'm looking at a photo I took yesterday when I went back in daylight. The rocks, the view, the sky. It looks so ordinary now, but I know what happened there. I know who I met there. I know what he showed me there. And standing on that stone platform, looking out over the valley, I understood something. We're all standing on an outcrop. We're all at a high place. We're all facing a choice between responding to heaven's call or ignoring it, between getting complete or staying in disorder, between moving from 11 to 12 or staying stuck. The view from the outcrop is beautiful, but it's also terrifying, because from a high place, you can see what's coming. You can see the storm on the horizon. You can see the consequences of choices not yet made. Jesus brought me to that high place so I could see, and now I'm bringing you to that high place so you can see too. The storm is here. March is coming. The deadline is set. And the only question that matters is, will you respond? Drop your comment. Make your commitment. Start your journey. Close your gaps. Move from 11 to 12, because heaven has marked you, and time is running out.